Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Today is Friday, July 15th. I am your host, Janice, and this is Stories That Inspire Us with Janice. Today, somebody else's story, you listening, you the viewer, you the listener, even if everything is absolutely perfect in your world, and we certainly hope that it is, you will be inspired by this young lady's story. I am so excited to have on my podcast this afternoon Melissa Miller. She's a former certified nursing assistant, an online business owner, a stay-at-home mom, and also a spousal giver. We've often chatted on stories that there's a story behind the story. Melissa's story is no different. I am excited. Here she is, the amazing Melissa Miller. Thank you so much for being here today on Stories.
Thank you for having me, Janice. It's a real treat to be here.
Well, thank you so much. Now, you have a lot of titles there, as many of us do, especially women, and men
Right?
do too. I want to leave them out. Your story is very unique because you found yourself in a position where your life, sometimes we think it's going to go one way and it, veers off and takes a real sharp turn. Why don't you give us the backdrop of your story?
Okay, well, it was wild. We'll just leave it at that. It was wild. But what happened was I have a prior 15-year background in healthcare as a certified nursing assistant. I primarily worked in long-term care facilities and I loved it. But all that changed in December of 2019. My husband had his first what we know now was an epileptic seizure. And the transition of going from a healthcare worker to a full-time stay-at-home mother and spousal caregiver kind of started out slow. It didn't happen overnight. January and March of 2020, he had one more episode each. And, we thought, okay, and we didn't think too much of it. We were working with a neurologist, but we didn't have a diagnosis yet. April was the turning point. That was the first month my husband had 10 to 20 plus seizures a month. We blew through our first medication like within the month. I mean, it wasn't slowing it down. And the neurologist we were working with at the time was just a general neurologist. So he's like, I'm handing you over to a specialist now because what I have to give you is obviously not working and it's beyond my expertise. So when beginning of May, when we were transitioning to a new medication and a new doctor team, I decided to go on a 3-week medical leave because I had a 1-year-old at the time. We also had the pandemic going on. So I thought to limit exposure and just knowing that there was even a higher risk of more breakthrough seizures because of where we were transitioning onto a new drug for safety and triage and just all the things I need to do. I decided to go on a 3-week medical leave. And in my gut and in the back of my brain, I was starting to realize this might be the norm long term, right? I was really feeling in my gut I needed to be home full time. I didn't have any clue of how I would make it work and if I left my career, but I knew that something was probably going to have to change. So I did start a job hunt. I could not find anything that would be flexible enough with my time as a stay-at-home mom and a caregiver. And I started my first blog. And then obviously getting from where I started then to where I went now has been 2 years in the making. But with my story, I definitely have felt very inspired and called to share my story because from my own struggles and journey of adjusting to this new dual role and season of life that we're in, I couldn't find resources that really met that criteria. So I was like, okay, if there's not resources on the market for it, I'm going to create them for somebody else, both to heal, but also just to provide for my family, to be brutally honest, but also just more than anything, I see my work as divine and as a ministry that the Lord has given me. And so I certainly want to do that. I want to serve others and bring some good out of my story. So that's it in a nutshell. There's obviously more between the lines, but that's to start out. That's where what kind of brought me from back then to now.
And thank you so much for sharing that. And you are so right. There's always more in between the lines. And it's in between those lines of what happened to my new normal? What happened to my normal and now I have a new normal. And when you said new normal, I felt a lot of history with that. So what I'm feeling is, okay, you've been on this roller coaster with your husband's health right before the epidemic that this started happening. I can't even fathom what it is like to be present. And you mentioned April of 2020, when your husband started having, it was about 20 to 30 seizures. Now, when people hear a seizure, typically, how long did how long did those seizures last? And obviously, you being in the healthcare field, you knew somewhat what to do, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I know more. I mean, it's interesting. In my 15-year career as a certified nursing assistant, I never had a patient with a seizure disorder or epilepsy. So the first 6 months of my stay-at-home mom and spousal caregiving journey, it felt like I was back in med school, to be brutally honest, because I was having to educate myself as best as I could, as I should, right, to be able to care for my husband's illness. But that one was really frustrating because the illness that my husband has, for those of you who aren't well acquainted with seizure disorders and epilepsy, is that it's a misunderstood diagnosis. People think it's a mental issue. It's not. It's involving the brain. Basically, what's happening in a nutshell is your brain is firing off averagely like 500 extra signals a day that should not be there. Our doctor calls them firestorms. And every time a firestorm happens, it's causing subsequent damage to the brain. So like my husband, for example, has left front temporal lobe epilepsy, which means that his front temporal lobe, because of all the subsequent firestorm seizures, if you will, has shrunk. And that can impact your short-term memory. That's why when people have seizures, a lot of the times they're confused. They don't remember things because it impacts short-term memory. But if it goes untreated and is not dealt with, it can impact your long-term memory and other health problems. And epilepsy in of itself is it's like you're throwing spaghetti at the wall. So, and it changes. And so my husband's seizures in the beginning, they were under 5 minutes. They're getting closer to 5 minutes now, and they're getting more intense. They're getting more painful. It's interesting when we're having this interview now, we're actually in a season 2 where we're in the throes of adjusting to a new drug because we need to get him stabilized. He's become drug resistant. And so we're trying to get him onto a new drug just to stabilize him for safety. And then so we can proceed with doing the testing and transitioning to look to see if we're a candidate for the right surgery procedure or a seizure device placement, because he's 2 years in and this is like his 5th drug that he's been on, not counting the ones that we use for seizure rescue if something happens. So it's a constant process of adjusting and learning and educated because it's such an individualistic disease, because you're dealing with a unique brain. You could have 50 people in the same room, and I guarantee you every single one would have a different medication dose, a different respond differently if they do need surgery or a certain type of surgery or a device placement. It can be different all across the board. So it's layers upon layers and seasons within seasons of dealing with this illness and being a caregiver too.
Right. So yours is twofold in a lot of different things. Well, I'm going to say threefold because you have a little one.
Yes, I have a 3-year-old.
Right. You're not only caring for your daughter, you're a caregiver for your spouse, and then you are the nucleus of the center of all that. Now, not knowing a lot about seizures, I only know a little, quite frankly, and I shared with you my son's life-threatening injury from last year. And does your husband, like, is he aware, like, does he feel a certain way? Like, has he described anything to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the interesting thing. So different types of seizures, there's focal, there's aurora, there's so many different types of seizures. Excuse me. Some you can people will be aware that something's happening, but then again, after the fact, when they come out of it, they don't remember, or sometimes they can feel it coming on and sometimes they don't. They just feel off. So my husband, he's had seizures where he just instantly goes out cold, and then I have to give him a certain medication to help him come to. Then there's others where it starts slow. It's like the pre kind of cursor signs to that firestorm coming on that I touched on a moment ago. So it might be something as simple. So for him to tell me what's going on, so I can kind of gauge, like, obviously I know kind of what his baseline is and what his triggers are
Mhm.
for or the signs that something could be happening. Something as simple, excuse me, as him saying, I feel off or I feel weird. So I'll give him some lorazepam because that's for that's his rescue medication for prevention, rescue medication for if he's alert and safely able to swallow. Now, if he's out cold, if he drops to the floor and he's actively in a seizure, I'll give him his nasal spray because when you have someone has a seizure, you need to get them onto their side or on their back. Do not put anything in their mouth. Do not hold them down. Make sure anything that is dangerous that they could thrash against or get hurt on is away from them, so that way they don't get another injury. And if you do see them fall, pay attention to if they hit their head. If they hit their head, there is the problem of, since they already have something wrong with their brain with epilepsy or the seizure disorder already, there's then the problem and concern of a concussion. And most of my husband's seizures have been such to where he hasn't necessarily fallen to the floor or collapsed to the floor. It's happened where I've been able to catch him and get him either lowered to the floor or on the bed or the couch or whatever, or he'll be sleeping and then he'll have had one in his sleep and then I have to give him a rescue medication to wake him up, if you will. But he has had one. He had one this month where he went to just shut the door to the microwave because he was getting something and he passed out and hit his head really hard. He's 6 foot and 190 pounds. So he's a big guy. So to fall at that rate and he hit a wood floor. So certainly we took him into the ER to get him checked out. And thank the Lord he was fine. But the doctors were like, he did the right thing. I'd rather us double check and find nothing than just play it off like, oh, I just fell, and then find out that there was more subsequent damage to his brain after the fact. So there's all these little layers of things that you
Right.
have to address.
Right. And as you were describing that, I thought back, of course, to my son's when he suffered a full skull fracture last July, as a matter of fact, and what he's been through ever since. And I have asked him, like, do you feel a certain way or like before it's happened? And he's like, no, for him, it's like a light switch. Like the most recent one, he was, standing in the kitchen doing some prep work at a restaurant, and the next thing he knew he woke up in an ambulance. And the he's very diligent about taking his medication. And I think I want to say he's on Keppra, but I could be wrong. But that is very scary no matter what situation that you are in. And I'm wondering, as time has gone, like when all of this first started for you, when you're seeing your loved one physically go through that must be just so heart-wrenching. I just can't even imagine.
It was horrible for my daughter. She was the first one she had. She wailed. We didn't know it was a seizure at the time because we woke up at 4:30 in the morning to change our daughter's diaper. I stepped out of the room to do something and I came back just to help, because we're both sleep deprived and it's early in the morning, right? Said, hey, to see if he's helped. He had a weird glazed look over his face. I asked him, are you okay? He got 3 words out, I don't know, and he hit the ground. Good thing I grabbed my daughter when I did, our daughter when he did, and got her to the crib. So, and then when he was out for only a couple seconds, and then when he came to, he's like, what happened? He had no recollection. But my daughter's screaming because she was terrified, and she was terrified several other times when I did have to send him to the hospital for seizures that did last longer than 5 minutes, and it was not coming to with rescue medication at the time. And it was just scary. And even all these days since, it's really sad when your 3-year-old has to come and get you when her father's having a seizure. And she's really good about that. She's only 3, and this has been going on since right before she turned 1. And she does get scary, and she's more verbal now because she was nonverbal because of the pandemic. She was a little delayed in her speech development because we were isolated and she wasn't around other children and other kids. But she's verbal now to where she can say pain. And she knows that daddy gets left-sided front temple pain, because that's another symptom. Sometimes he'll just have shooting, sharp pain will be another symptom or trigger to indicate something's wrong. And even after the fact, because all that firestorm, it makes it hurt. It's like a muscle. Like when something happens traumatically to you, sometimes it's temporal after the fact, after the moment will hurt too. So it's still traumatizing, because it's scary. Because the other thing with for those of you who are also aware of with seizures and epilepsy, that there's what's called SUDEP, sudden unexpected or sudden unexplained death by a seizure, by epilepsy. And it can happen. And we had that happen with one of his coworkers. My husband had another coworker that was epileptic and passed away from seizure. And so that has just triggered my husband and I, obviously, even more, knowing that SUDEP is real and it could happen. We just don't know. That's why it's so important. That's why I have to be home with him. So if he has a seizure, I can triage him and make the appropriate steps, whether that's giving, the appropriate seizure rescue medication in the time, calling our medical team to let them know what's going on. And God forbid, if I have to, call 911 or drive him into the ER if it's a situation where I witnessed something, but I just need to get him checked out. So it's very serious. And I'm fortunate that I have my 15-year prior healthcare career, but for the average person, I can imagine it being incredibly terrifying and overwhelming for the average person who's trying to adjust to not only just being a first-time mom like I was a first-time mom with almost 1-year-old when my husband started getting sick, and then on top of that, having to educate herself with no prior medical training on how to deal with an illness. So it's a lot to take in, and if it can happen to my family, it can happen to somebody else. Because I do want to touch on, lastly too, is that with chronic illnesses, you don't have to have prior medical history for it to happen to you. With seizure disorders, 30% of the population, 20 to 30% of the population within their lifetime, without medical history as a child or as an adult, will deal with a seizure disorder statistically within their lifetime. And that's unfortunately where my husband falls in the gap of the population. He didn't have a family member that had it, so we had no prior warning that was going to maybe come down the pipeline from that end. And he never had seizures as a child either. So there was no history as a child to that. And that's usually how it's caught. But again, there is that 20 to 30% of the population that for no apparent reason, they'll get a seizure disorder. And that's exactly where my husband falls.
And that is extremely frightening.
It's very frightening, and it's very overwhelming too. Like, okay, it's one thing if you know that you have a medical background or history of something, X, Y, and Z, you name it, whatever it is, something medical related in your family tree, so you know to prepare and take care of yourself. But what about those blindsided things that you don't anticipate, that you don't know about? And that's what I'm very passionate about teaching and sharing, is that I'd rather you be prepared in advance than not. But if you're not, that's where I step in. It's like, okay, you've been hit with an unexpected illness, your spouse has been hit with an unexpected illness, I got you. I can help you. I can teach you things to help you manage it using my medical knowledge and just things I've learned in my own journey. Because here's the thing, as a mom in general, you write your own rule book, but what really is a trigger and crazy thing too, that you have to incorporate too, when you become a spousal caregiver, the rule book goes out the window. There's no 101 to spousal caregiving. Everyone's different, and you have to learn to write your own rule book on top of being a new mom. So, the rules go out the window. So the trick is, the rub is that there's lots of people that can teach you things, but it's not about necessarily copying them 100% to a T. Okay, what works 100% for me, I guarantee won't work for Janice all the way if she was in this situation, and that's cool and that's fine. So what I want to do is come alongside you and teach you the fundamental basics of what I've learned, but then I want you to tweak it into a way that makes sense to your situation, and then just run with what works for you, and then omit what doesn't work. Okay, that's what it's about here. But it's just a season and a journey that's different for everybody. And you have to figure out what works for you and your family, because every chronic illness is different. The signs, the symptoms, the triggers, the treatments. Some chronic illnesses, they're so brand new that there's not really any testing. Like, for example, I have hypothyroidism and IBS. Hypothyroidism they can test for with a blood test. IBS though is usually diagnosed after you've omitted everything else. I was so sick. I was so sick all of 2021, and I get gut issues in of itself because of my hypothyroidism. So I thought it was related to that, but actually it was my IBS. And I didn't get that diagnosed until December of 2021 after 4 doctors, 2 medical procedures to find out what was wrong. And it was again after the fact, after we omitted everything. And if you're the caregiver for a chronic illness like that, it can be it's a marathon. It can definitely be a marathon when you're trying to navigate that season of figuring out what's wrong, for one, to get a diagnosis, getting on with the right doctor, and getting on the right treatment. I'm doing better now because I finally found the right doctor. I have a GI doctor. That's what I need. And I'm on 2 medications to manage my illness. But, in the beginning, you don't know what you don't know, because as chronic illnesses can look like and mask and be similar to a number of other things. And so that's another people that with chronic illnesses struggle with, is misdiagnosis, wrong treatments, and then they feel yucky for no reason. So it's a process.
Right. In that process, and as you said, with caring for somebody with a chronic illness, I mean, obviously the topic of discussion is seizures and epilepsy in reference to your story, but what you're talking about really can be applied to anybody that's dealing with a chronic illness, any caregiver, any person that's personally going through it themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
It's just tough. I mean, I would have paid money to have somebody come alongside me and teach me how to do all this stuff that I've taught myself. It's a process. You have to have, there's the medical side of dealing with all the medications, the phone calls, the doctors, the learning the baseline for your spouse or your loved one of what their norm is with their illness. And when you're seeing, there's the baseline, but then what's the red flag? What are the red flag symptoms for your unique situation that, okay, we're going to give it a little bit of extra medication, or this is something new. I'm going to jot it down in my medical log notes, and I'm going to call the doctor, or bring this up at the next follow-up appointment we have next week. What are, X, Y, and Z. There's so many moving pieces to this, and it can feel really freaking overwhelming.
Yes. And as you were saying, the part of it, like a puzzle, it's like a 10,000 piece puzzle.
Pretty much. It really is.
Because there's the outer border of a puzzle, but its shape can change based on whatever's happening. So I want to get to a place where we chat about how you're going through all this. Your husband is going through all this, your daughter. At what point did you say or think about creating this online business?
Well, I'd say pretty much the July of 2021. I went on medical leave in May of 2020. I kept extending my notice, my leave through the summer, because we were transitioning to that new doctor. We blew through our second medication by June. And so then in July was when we finally had the breakthrough of another of actual medical proof. We had an MRI scan done at an actual MRI facility that has a bigger magnet, like just so people are clued in. The pictures that an MRI machine, at a hospital can take good pictures, but not as in depth, because it's actually smaller than some of the bigger ones. Like if you go to an actual MRI facility that just does MRIs, that's all they do, like, MRI scanning, in medical imaging. That's what we needed, because they got way more detailed pictures of my husband's brain and could actually see damage too. They could actually finally see the damage to his brain from all the seizures. And so we had the medical proof we needed. So that's what clinched it for me, that, okay, this little blog that I'm toying around with, I'm turning it into an online business. I still had no clue for sure what I was going to do though, at that point, but I gave my notice at work and I quit my job. And that was scary. And that was terrifying, because we lost over more than half our income. And my husband was already starting to pull back his hours to part-time. Because stress is a trigger for epilepsy and seizure disorder. So he was needing to limit that. Missing your meds, not enough sleep, not enough nutrition, and stress are big keynotes for dealing with epilepsy or any type of seizure disorder. So I struggled with what to do with my online business. I have a healthcare background. I have a CNA certification. I have no prior background in marketing, in business, coaching, you name it. I have no clue what I was doing. So I struggled for the rest of the summer of 2020, but in October of 2020, God gave me a blessing. I found my business coach, Faith Mariah, who I still have as my coach today. And she helped me get clear about where I wanted to do. She taught me about market research and about finding your gap in the market for who you want to serve. And I finally connected the dots of like, okay, I can't find resources for me and I need to create a business. So you know what? I'm going to become that resources that your girl never had. So hence my coaching business was born. So I did keep toying around with that blog for the rest of for up until May of 2021. And then that's when I realized that, you know what, I'm not so much of a strong writer. I'm really passionate about teaching and using digital resources. So I shifted from trying to do a traditional blog with, actual blog on it to actually doing more digital type resources. I have a coaching one-on-one program now. I do voice memo coaching, things like that. That's what lights me up. And creating digital resources for people to get organized with their motherhood and caregiving journey, like managing their spouse's medical information and getting organized with your daily to-do list for in a bite-sized form where like before your spouse got sick, you worked 40 hours a week, you had days off, you catch up with laundry and housework. Then that doesn't work because you can't bet on that with your spouse's illness of having an off day. Because I know from speaking to what I know, if my husband has a seizure, he's out for the rest of the day and I'm happy to take care of our daughter and I may not get anything done. So how can you pull back your to-do list and do like just bite-sized things? Like today we did one load of laundry and it's in the dryer right now. And that's a good day for me. I got one load of laundry. I have clean clothes for the weekend and I'm ahead of it. And my rule of thumb is before I would wait and do it on my days off, I might have to do 3 or 4 loads. Now my rule of thumb is to keep ahead because of just the chaos of my life. If the basket gets 3/4 to all the way full, I run a load. So, or if I know we're going to be tied up with things going on throughout the week, I'll do a smaller load just to kind of stay ahead. So doing what works for you with the situation that you're in a way that makes sense and is realistic is what I teach and what I'm passionate about showing other people how to do when you're dealing with the up and down, unpredictable chaos of a chronic illness, because you never know when you're going to have a good day and a bad day. We hope for all those high days where we're up here, right, things are going good, we can keep doing our routine. But when your spouse has a bad day or your loved one has a bad day, everything stops. It is okay, you go into caregiver mode, mom mode, everything else gets pushed back to the back burner. Forget it. So like in terms of my business, if my husband has an off day, okay, I'm not going to be working that much, or I'm going to have to be creative and maybe work a little bit on my phone during nap time or something, which is usually my me time, but sometimes I have to pick up the slack because I have deadlines and things like that. So you just kind of go with the flow every day. Every day can be different. Every week can be different. And that's okay. But that's just the kind of the complex, rough part of the hand that you're dealt when you're a spousal caregiver with a chronic illness, or anyone with a chronic illness that you're caring for.
And what I imagined was controlled chaos with yo-yos flying all over the place.
Pretty much. Like I said, think about that analogy I used earlier of spaghetti. You're throwing spaghetti at the wall and it is just coming. You're trying to get to a certain point where you can go, okay, I got this, but then something else happens. And that the first year for us was really hell. It was really like that because my husband had so many months. It took us until like the end of 2021 to finally get him stabilized on his then third medication to get him stabilized to where he was having less. He was having maybe a few each month, but it wasn't like the chaos in the beginning back in the spring of 2020 where he was having 10 to 20 plus seizures a month. So
wow. Now in your copious spare time, if you do have any spare time,
right,
what is one thing that you love to do that's just for you?
I love to knit. I'm getting back into that. I haven't really done anything since before my daughter was born, which was 3.5 years ago. So I'm getting back into that for a form of self-care. And then I just am guilt-free. I like to listen to podcasts, play games on my phone, read books. I really love, because since I do so much stuff that's tech driven, I love the sentimentality of even just opening a book and just holding a hardback book and just reading it and turning the pages. And especially if it is mindset or spiritual type stuff where I'm going to learn something, I love to be able to use my own, erasable pens and mark and make notes and things like that. That's something that I like. And obviously just spending time with my family is one.
Oh,
Life
absolutely.
is so much more precious when your spouse is chronically sick. You just don't take life for granted anymore. So
In your life has taken on such a new meaning in such a very poignant, beautiful way, I think, because you've taken this controlled chaos, this spaghetti to the wall, and you've created something amazing from it. It's like you're taking your tragedy, your family's tragedy,
mhm.
and you're doing good in the world, and you're creating that ripple effect. How would somebody get a hold of you? In other words, because I've never heard of somebody with your specialty, which I think is phenomenal.
Right. I've pretty much created it. My business coach was saying something about that the other day. She's like, you've created this dual niche that no one's talking about. You found your gap in the market. I said, well, that's what it's all about. So the best way to get a hold of me would be either shoot me a DM on my Instagram at Melissa Miller 2011. Or you can shoot me an email at melissamiller@tyrosupermom.com. And then we can set up either a free support call, 30-minute support call, if that's your jam, or we can just decide on what types of resources you are. Because the real thing is I need to know what your situation is and where you're at in your journey. Like what, because that's going to tap into and play into what types of resources I give you.
Which leads me to another question. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, but it's not specifically related to epilepsy, but they are a caregiver with somebody with a chronic illness, would that be something that you would potentially speak to them about? Or
Oh, absolutely. I'm targeting
gotcha.
younger moms or moms with kids who are having to be who are forced to become a stay-at-home mom out of necessity for their spouse's illness. So it doesn't have to be epilepsy. I want to be clear about that. I will help you. If it's a chronic illness, the main thing is I'm just going to teach you how to be prompt. That's my acronym: preparing for the unexpected, reaching out for support, getting organized around your home, managing your chaotic schedule. Hello, prioritizing self-care. Don't burn out physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Don't do it the hard way. I did that and I regret it. So I don't want that to be you. And telling your story as a way to heal and raise awareness for your loved one's spouse, for your loved one or spousal's illness. So
Wow.
that's what it's about. It's more targeting just helping moms who are having to be forced into being a stay-at-home mom because of their spouse getting sick sooner than anticipated. Because statistically, we anticipate caring for our spouses when they're over 65, when you're retired, your kids are grown, and you anticipate the body breaking down. And we anticipate caring for our spouse, or excuse me, for our parents and our grandparents because of the age gap. You don't anticipate caring for your spouse when you have a toddler at home. We just don't anticipate that. My husband, in your prime, my husband is almost 20 years my senior, but he is still young and relatively healthy. He was only 53 when this started. I was 34, 36, somewhere in there. So, or 34, 35, excuse me. But anyway, still, we were in our prime and we were just starting our family. So we didn't anticipate it. It wasn't on our radar. We had no clue and no warning with medical history either, like I touched on earlier. So if this is you, listen to me. If this is you, if your spouse just got sick, if you're struggling to find a diagnosis, if you have kids at home, if you're going crazy because you feel so isolated and alone because you're adjusting to being home full time and not working that 9 to 5 and not getting 40 hours a week of a break somewhat, even though it's a job, you get the break to be with other adults. I got you. I went through the same thing and I can help you. Okay, so get in touch and let's figure out a realistic motherhood and caregiving routine that works for you realistically with the situation that you have. Okay, that's what it's all about. It's easy. I can help you.
And folks, she certainly can. There is so much to say about the type of work that you do, Melissa. And I know that someone who listens to this podcast, whether it be, listening, viewing the video or listening to it on iHeartRadio, whatever your jam is, and you have you are in a situation as Melissa was thrust into unexpectedly, definitely reach out to her. She can certainly help you and direct you in the right direction. And truly, from the bottom of my heart, I've been inspired, because these are the stories that inspire us. And today, I was inspired by Melissa Miller. Melissa, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, being an amazing guest on Stories That Inspire Us. And I hope you definitely will consider visiting us again.
Absolutely. If you ever want to do a part 2, I'll just throw a challenge out there. If you guys want a part 2, leave a comment in the description below, and also any questions. And if you don't feel comfortable, if you don't want to necessarily reach out to me quite yet, but you'd like your question addressed, leave them below in the comments, and Janice can forward those to me, and I can address those on my Instagram, because I do reels and TikTok every day. So if you have a question, I can do a video so you can see me on camera and I can help you. Okay, so we'll figure it out. And I'd be more than happy to be back if Janice would like to have me for a part 2. So leave those questions below. Let us know what your struggles are, so I can know how to help you for part 2. Okay.
Part 2 coming soon. We're not sure when, but we definitely will discuss it. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for listening, for inspiring us with the stories that inspire us. My name is Janice Malillo, and I am your host. Again, today, I was inspired by Melissa's story. Have a great day, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.